Resumes after the worm. They camped for a full day in the rock fissure while Jessica recovered. Paul set up the still tent in the deepest part of the crevasse where the shade lasted longest and the rock walls trapped the faint moisture of their breath. He found anchor holes drilled into the stone, evidence that Fremen had camped here before, perhaps many times over many generations. The thought was strangely comforting. They were not the first people to survive this desert. They would not be the last. On the second morning, Paul took his binoculars and climbed to the rim of the fissure. The desert stretched away to the south, dune after dune, a golden ocean frozen in time. On the far side of the open erg, perhaps 4 kilometers away, a cliff rose like a fortress wall, its face marked with the horizontal striations of ancient rock. That was where they needed to go. That was where the Fremen might be found. He was scanning the cliff when he saw the worm. It came from the south, a ripple in the sand that grew into a wave, and the wave grew into a mountain, and the mountain opened a mouth that could have swallowed a guild frigate whole. The mouth was a cavern of crystal teeth, each one as long as a man, gleaming white and razor-edged in the first light of the sun. Paul had seen worms before, from the air, from the safety of an ornithopter. He had never seen one from ground level, from the perspective of prey. The worm passed perhaps 2 kilometers from their fissure. It did not turn toward them, they were in the rocks. And worms avoided rock, but the sound of its passage was a physical pressure, a subsonic rumble that vibrated in Paul's chest and made his teeth ache. The sand around it boiled and fountained. The desert reshaped itself behind its wake, dunes collapsing, the landscape erased and redrawn in the span of a single breath. I have seen space frigates that were smaller, Paul whispered. Jessica had climbed up behind him. She looked at the worm, looked at the distance between their fissure and the far cliff, and said, "How do we cross?" "We use a thumper." "A what?" "A device the Fremen use. It makes a rhythmic pulse in the sand. The worm thinks it is prey. It comes for the thumper instead of us. We cross while it is distracted." "And if the worm is not distracted, then we die." Paul's voice was matter of fact, "but we die trying to reach safety, which is better than staying here and dying of thirst." Jessica did not argue. The old Jessica, the Lady Jessica of the Atreides household, the concubine of a duke, might have argued, might have demanded a safer plan, a better plan, a plan that did not involve running across open sand toward a monster that could swallow buildings. But that Jessica had died in the fall of Arrakis. The woman who stood on the rim of the fissure was a survivor, and survivors did not waste energy arguing with reality. "When do we go?" she asked. "Tonight. The worms travel less at night, and we need to train before we go." "Train?" Jessica's eyes sharpened. "You want to train now? You were right before." "On Caladan, when you were angry that Gurney was going easy on me. The desert does not care about my mood. Neither will the Fremen. Neither will the worm." He held up his hands. They were still raw from the digging, the cuts scabbed over with sand and dried blood. "I need to be ready for whatever happens on the other side." Jessica studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Hand muscles first. You have been favoring your right since the sandslide." She drove him hard as she had ever driven him in the training rooms of Castle Caladan. Hand exercises, balance drills, the subtle internal disciplines that let a Bene Gesserit adept control individual muscle fibers as easily as a normal person controlled a fist. Paul's body was exhausted, dehydrated, running on adrenaline and spice and the strange clarity that had been growing in his mind since his prescience had awakened. But he did not complain. He did not ask to stop. He worked until his hands were steady and his stance was grounded and his mother's critical eye could find no fault in his form. When they finished, the sun was setting and the desert was cooling, and somewhere to the south, another worm rumbled beneath the sand. "You are ready?" Jessica said. "I hope so." "You are?" She touched his face, a gesture she had not made since he was a child. "Your father would be proud." Paul said nothing. His father was dead, and pride was a luxury for people who were not running for their lives across a planet that wanted to eat them. But he let the moment hold for a beat longer than was strictly necessary, because he was still, despite everything, his mother's son. Halleck's Pledge and the Royal Game. Far to the north, in a smuggler cave carved into the shield wall, Gurney Halleck knelt on a stone floor and offered his sword to a man named Twek. The smuggler was old, his face a map of wrinkles and spice-addicted eyes, but his grip was still strong and his authority among the desert outlaws was absolute. He had found Halleck and his surviving men staggering through the rocklands 3 days after the fall of Arrakeen. He had given them water, food, shelter, and now Halleck was offering to repay the debt with steel. "I release my men from any bond to me," Halleck said. His voice was hoarse, the voice of a man who had been screaming or singing or both. "They can choose for themselves. With Rabban here, I stay." Chuk looked at the sword. It was an Atreides blade, the hilt worn smooth by years of service. The hands that offered it were calloused and scarred, the hands of a man who had killed for his duke and would kill again for his revenge. "In your mood," Chuk said carefully, "I am not sure we want you to stay." "You doubt my word?" "No." The smuggler's eyes were old and wise and full of a cunning that had kept him alive on a planet where the Harkonnens had placed 1,000,000 Solari bounty on his head. "But I doubt your patience. The Fremen have a saying, 'Speed is a device of Shaitan.' You want to run towards your revenge. The desert does not reward running." Behallet could answer. A voice called from deeper in the cave, weak, thready, the voice of a dying man. "Gurney." Halleck rose, sheathed his sword, and went to the corner where the wounded had been laid out. Matai was there, one of his oldest soldiers, a man who had served House Atreides since before Paul was born. His chest was bandaged, but the bandages were dark with blood that had not stopped seeping. His face was the gray-white of a man who had already begun the journey that no water could reverse. "I am here," Halleck said. "Sing for me," Matai whispered. "The old song, my woman. My wife used to sing it on Caladan." Halleck's throat tightened. He had not touched his balisette since the Harkonnen attack. The instrument had been lost in the chaos, left behind in a barracks that was now ash and memory. But he had his voice. He had always had his voice. "The ocean is wide," he sang, low and rough. "The ocean is wide. I cannot swim over, and neither have I the wings to fly." Matai smiled. His eyes closed. His breathing slowed. "Give me a boat," Halleck continued, his voice cracking. "That will carry two, and both shall row, my love and I." The breathing stopped. Halleck sat in the silence, his hands loose at his sides, his face empty of expression. Then he stood, turned to Twek, and said, "I will stay. I will serve, and when the day comes that I can put my knife into a Harkonnen throat, I will be ready." Tuke nodded slowly, then take the oath. Halleck knelt again, placed his sword across his palms with the blade toward himself, thumb folded flat in the gesture of fealty. He spoke the words that bound him to the smuggler, and when he rose, he was no longer Gurney Halleck of the Atreides household. He was Gurney Halleck, Sword of Tuke, a man with nothing left except his music and his vengeance. Flight from the worm to the rock crack. Paul planted the thumper in the deepest part of the crevasse, where the sand was loose and the resonance would carry farthest. The device was a simple thing, a spring-driven hammer striking a hollow stake, but the Fremen who had made it had understood the physics of the desert. When Paul triggered the timer and climbed back to the rock ledge, the sound was already pulsing through the sand, a steady, rhythmic lump, lump, lump that mimicked the heartbeat of wounded prey. "We have about 15 minutes before it arrives," Paul said. "We walk without rhythm. Do not step in time with the thumper. Do not drag your feet. The worm feels vibration through the sand. If it detects a pattern that is not the thumper, it will investigate." "What about the drum sand?" Jessica pointed to a patch of open desert where the surface was darker, rougher sand that had been compacted by wind into a crust that would boom like a drum if you stepped on it. "If we hit drum sand, we run. We run as fast as we can and we pray." They descended from the rocks and stepped onto the open erg. The dunes rose around them, smooth curves of gold and amber in the moonlight. The air was cold desert night cold, the kind of cold that seeped through stillsuit fabric and numbed your fingers and made you forget that by noon the sand would be hot enough to blister bare skin. Paul led. His feet found the patterns that Fremen feet had walked for generations, not the steady march of a soldier, but the broken, syncopated rhythm of a desert creature that had learned to survive in the presence of worms. Step, pause, step, step, pause, long stride, short stride, pause. It was exhausting, requiring constant attention, constant adjustment. But it worked. The sand beneath them remained silent. The thumper continued its drumbeat behind them. They were halfway across when Jessica grabbed his arm. The thumper stopped. Paul listened. The night was silent, the deep silence of a place where no bird sang and no wind blew and no machine had ever operated. Then the sand began to move. It came from the direction of the thumper, but not directly toward themselves, perhaps 200 meters, the sand bulging upward like a blister on the surface of the planet. The bulge grew into a wave, and the wave grew into a crest, and the crest broke open, and the worm rose from the desert like a mountain climbing out of the earth. Its mouth was 80 meters across, a furnace of crystal teeth lit from within by the orange glow of the spice melange that was its lifeblood. Sand cascaded from its sides in rivers, the air filled with the smell of cinnamon and ozone and something older, something that spoke of the deep planetary forces that had shaped Arrakis before humans had ever set foot on its surface. Run, Paul said. They ran, not toward the cliff the worm had cut off that route, but at an angle, racing across the face of a dune toward a patch of rock that jutted from the sand 50 meters to the east. The dune was unstable, the surface slipping beneath their feet, but running uphill in loose sand was something Paul had trained for. His legs found the rhythm his feet had been forced to suppress. He was fast. He was very fast. Then the drum sand boomed beneath him. The sound was like a kettle drum, deep and resonant, and it was answered immediately by the hiss of the worm's passage shifting direction. The creature changed course, drawn by the new vibration, its massive body carving a furrow through the dunes that would take a century for the wind to erase. Faster! Paul shouted. Jessica was falling behind. Her pregnancy was not yet visible, but it was already taking a toll on her endurance, her lung capacity, her ability to push her body to the limits that survival demanded. Paul grabbed her arm and pulled, dragging her forward, his feet digging into the sand with a desperation that overrode every discipline he had ever learned. The rocks were 30 meters away. 20, 10, they reached the fissure just as the worm's shadow fell across them. Paul shoved his mother into the crack and threw himself after her, and behind them the worm's mouth closed on empty air where their bodies had been a half-second before. The sound that followed was not a roar. It was a grinding, a crushing of crystal teeth against rock, as the worm discovered that its prey had escaped into a place it could not follow. Then the sand settled, and the night was silent again, and Paul lay on his back in the bottom of the fissure, gasping for breath, staring up at the stars through a slot in the stone. "Is it gone?" Jessica whispered. Before Paul could answer, a new sound reached them. Lump, 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 lump. Another thumper. Farther away, perhaps on the far side of the cliff. And the worm heard it. The grinding stopped. The sand shifted. The great bulk of the creature slid away to the south, chasing the new drumbeat that called it away from the rocks. Someone had saved them. Someone on the far side of the cliff had known they were crossing, had planted a thumper to draw the worm away. "Fremen," Paul said. Worm called away, climbed to basin, Fremen confrontation. The cliff was sheer, but there were handholds carved into the rock. Ancient, weathered, the work of generations of Fremen who had used this route as an approach to the deep desert. Paul climbed first, his fingers finding the subtle indentations, his feet bracing against ledges that had been cut to Fremen proportions. Jessica followed, slower but steady, her Bene Gesserit training compensating for her exhaustion. The top of the cliff opened onto a basin, a hidden bowl between ridges where the moisture of morning dew collected in shallow pools, and the sparse vegetation of Arrakis saguaro cactus, creosote bush, the tough little plants that could survive on near-zero water grew in defiance of the desert. It was a beautiful place, a secret garden hidden in the heart of a planet that had no business supporting gardens. And for a moment, Paul forgot where he was and simply looked at it, drinking in the sight of anything that was not sand. Then a voice spoke from the darkness. "Do not run. If you run, you will die." The voice was resonant, accented, the voice of a man who had spoken Fremen Arabic all his life and had learned Galak only as a second language. Paul could not see the speaker. The moonlight was bright enough to silhouette the rocks, but the shadows were deep, and the voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We are not armed," Paul said. "Everyone is armed. We are not." Paul held his hands away from his body, palms open. "We are fugitives. The Harkonnens cast us into the desert to die. We are seeking the Fremen." Silence. Then the voice said, "You have found them." A figure stepped from behind a rock formation, tall, lean, robed in the desert fashion, the hood of a stillsuit pulled back to reveal a weathered face, with eyes that were entirely blue within blue. The eyes of a man who had consumed spice every day of his life. the eyes of a Fremen. "I am Stilgar," the man said, "Naib of Sietch Tabra. You are the Duke's son. I am Paul Atreides." "Then you are the one Liet told us to find." Stilgar's eyes moved to Jessica, assessed her, dismissed her. "The woman is a liability. We have too little water for useless mouths." Jessica moved before Stilgar could finish the thought. She feigned a faint collapsing toward him, and when he reached to catch her, she pivoted, twisted, and pinned him against the rock with his own Kreis knife pressed to his throat. The movement was so fast, so precise, that the other Fremen who had been concealed in the shadows did not even have time to raise their weapons. "I am not useless," Jessica said. Her voice was silk wrapped around steel. "And I am not a liability. I am a Bene Gesserit, trained in the weirding way. Your legends speak of me, Stilgar. You know who I am." Stilgar's eyes were wide, but not with fear, with recognition, with something that might have been hope. "The Lisan al-Gaib," he breathed. "The voice from the outer world. They said a mother and son would come. They said many things," Jessica said. She released him, stepped back, handed him his knife. "We need sanctuary. We offer training. The weirding way for your warriors. In exchange, you protect us, guide us, keep us alive." Stilgar rubbed his throat. He was breathing hard, but his expression was no longer hostile. It was calculating, a leader's expression. "You fight well. It is what I am. And the boy?" Stilgar looked at Paul, who had not moved during the confrontation. "Can he fight?" "He has been tested with the Gom-Jabbar," Jessica said. "He has killed Harkonnen soldiers with his bare hands." "He is his father's son." Stilgar's eyebrows rose. The Gom-Jabbar was a term that had meaning to the Fremen, a legend, a prophecy, a piece of the Missionaria Protectivas long-planted myths. He looked at Paul with new eyes. "There is one who does not believe," Stilgar said. "Jameis. He says the legend is a trick, that outsiders bring only trouble. He will demand a test." "What kind of test?" Paul asked. "The Amtal rule, single combat, to the death." Paul felt the future split open around him. He saw himself in this basin, in this moonlight, with a knife in his hand and a man named Jameis facing him. He saw himself die. He saw Jameis die. He saw both outcomes and 1,000 variations between them, all branching from this moment in a web of consequence that stretched out into years and centuries. "I accept," Paul said. Jessica bargains for sanctuary. Paul meets Chani. Before the challenge could be made formal, a young woman stepped from the shadows at the edge of the basin. She was small, with an elfin face and eyes that were entirely blue on blue, and she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had been born in the desert and had never learned to fear it. Paul's breath caught. He knew this face. He had seen it in his dreams on Caladan, in the visions that had come to him before he had ever tasted spice, before he had ever set foot on Arrakis. The girl who called him Usul, the girl who asked about water. "I am Chani," she said, "daughter of Liet." "I know you," Paul said. "You do not know me. I do." He took a step toward her, and the Fremen around them tensed, but Stilgar made no move to stop him. "I have seen you in my dreams since I was a child. You called me Usul, the base of the pillar, a Fremen word I had never heard before." Charna's face went still. The spice-blue eyes searched his face with an intensity that was almost physical. Then, slowly, she nodded. "My father said you would come. He said the prophecy was true. When they brought him back from the desert, when the Harkonnens left him to die in the sand, his last message was that we must protect the Duke's son. For Liet is dead. He is one with the water now." Chana's voice did not waver, but her eyes glittered in the moonlight. "The Harkonnens will pay for his water. We will make them pay." Stilgar stepped forward, placing himself between Paul and Chani. "The girl is right. There will be a reckoning. But first, there is the Amtal rule. Jameis will not be denied." "Then let him challenge me," Paul said, "and let us be done with it." Accepted into Stilgar's troop. Stilgar called 2 squares of gauze from one of his men and fixed one around Jessica's neck, the other around Paul's. "Now you wear the kerchief of the Baka. If we become separated, you will be recognized as belonging to Stilgar Sietch. We will talk of weapons another time. Baka the Weeper." Jessica felt the symbolism of the kerchiefs unite the band around them. She saw the way the Fremen moved with the discipline of soldiers, not rabble. They checked their formation, redistributed loads, assigned positions to the wounded. These were not wild desert scavengers. They were a military force. Stilgar turned to Shani. "Keep the boy out of trouble." "I am not a boy," Paul said. "You are a child man who has much to learn. Chani will see that you learn it. Jameis, you will guard them both." Jameis, the man Paul had subdued in the basin, looked up from beneath lowered brows. His nod was stiff, his jaw tight. He had wanted to kill them. Now he was responsible for their safety. The tension between duty and resentment was a visible thing. Jessica barked a single phrase. "Paul has been tested with the Gom Jabbar." The troop went still. Fremen faces turned toward her, and in their eyes she saw something shift, the name Gom Jabbar landing with the weight of prophecy. Stilgar looked at Paul with a new expression, one that held calculation and recognition in equal measure. "We move," Stilgar said, "to the Cave of the Ridges. You will see Sietch Tabra before dawn." Stilgar's trust and the Fremen dream. On the march, Jessica found herself walking beside Stilgar. The Naib had placed himself at the rear of the column, where he could watch the new additions and his own people at the same time. "A leader's habit. It's important that a leader keep the respect of his troop," she said. "Isn't a one of those sand lice I cannot handle," Stilgar said. "When you bested me, you bested us all. Now they hope to learn from you the weirding way, and some are curious to see if you intend to call me out." She weighed the implications. "By besting you in formal battle?" He nodded. "I'd advise you against this, because they'd not follow you. You're not of the sand. They saw this in our night's passage. Practical people. True enough." He glanced at the basin behind them. "We know our needs, but not many are thinking deep thoughts now this close to home. We've been out overlong arranging to deliver our spice quota to the free traders. For the cursed guild, may their faces be forever black." Jessica stopped. "The guild? What has the guild to do with your spice?" Stilgar studied her face for a long moment. Then he seemed to reach a decision. "We bribe them with a monstrous payment in spice to keep our skies clear of satellites, so no one above can see what we are doing." "And what are you doing?" "Making a world. My father's father's father dreamed of it. Liatkins gave us the plan. We are changing Arrakis, slowly, generation by generation. One day there will be open water here. One day a man will walk beneath an open sky without a stillsuit and breathe air that smells of growing things." Jessica looked out across the desert basin, at the sparse saguaro and the tough little shrubs that clawed moisture from the dawn air. She saw, for the first time, the shape of the Fremen dream, not survival, but transformation. Not endurance, but victory. These people were not hiding, they were building. "How long have you been paying the guild?" she asked. "Longer than you have been alive. The guild knows what we are doing." "They do not care. As long as the spice flows, they will keep our secret." A mirage shimmered in the distance, heat haze and refracted light, and for a moment Jessica thought she saw figures riding on the back of a worm. She blinked, and they were gone, but the image stayed with her. The Fremen had not just survived the worms, they had learned to master them. "You ride the makers," she said. Stilgar's face became guarded. "Who told you this?" "No one. I saw it, just now, in the heat shimmer, a vision of what your people can do." He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "You are Sayadina, the friend of God. There are things you will learn when you pass within, but for now, know this. We have placed our trust in you. Do not betray it." "I will not," Jessica said. And she meant it. Jameis invokes the Amtal rule. In the Cave of the Ridges, Jessica performed the ceremony that sealed her role among the Fremen. She stood at the mouth of the cave, the glow globes casting her shadow long against the rock, and she chanted the words that the Missionaria Protectiva had planted on this planet centuries before she was born. "Mine enemies are like green blades eaten down that did stand in the path of the tempest. Hast thou not seen what our Lord did? He sent the pestilence among them that did lay schemes against us." Back from the inner darkness came the whispered response of many voices. "Their works have been overturned. The fire of God mount over thy heart," she said. "The fire of God set alight," they answered. In the sudden hush, Stilgar bowed to her. "Sayadina, if the Shai Hulud grant, then you may yet pass within to become a reverend mother." She nodded, feeling the weight of the role settle onto her shoulders. This was manipulation, the deliberate exploitation of planted legends for survival, but it was also real. The Fremen believed, and belief in the desert was a force as powerful as water. Paul, meanwhile, had eaten the concentrated spice food the Fremen had given him. He sat against the cave wall, his eyes half closed, his breathing slow. The melange was working on him, opening doors in his mind that had been closed before. He saw the cave as a nexus, a point where countless futures converged and diverged, where every decision created a new branch of possibility. He saw himself in those futures, and in most of them, he saw his own dead body. A gaping knife wound, eyes staring at the cave ceiling, the water of his flesh being measured and divided, and he saw the face of the man who would challenge him, Jameis. Jameis stepped forward from the circle, his voice was loud in the cave's echoing space. I invoke the Amtel rule. I challenge the boy to single combat. Let the legend be tested. Stilgar's face tightened. Jameis, you are one to hold a grudge. The boy bested you at Tuono Basin, and it was an accident. There was witch force there, and I will prove it now. I have bested you myself, Stilgar continued, his voice hardening. You seek by this Dahadi challenge to get back at me as well. There is too much violence in Jameis for him ever to make a good leader. Too much gafla, the distraction. The Amtal rule is law, Jameis said. Even a Na'ib cannot deny it. The boy fights, or the legend is false. Jessica stepped forward, her face cold. If you harm my son, I will give you agony beyond anything you have ever Sayadina. Stilgar's voice cut her off. You will not interfere. The Amtal rule is sacred. If the boy is what you claim, he will prove it. Paul rose to his feet. He had seen this moment in his visions. He had seen himself die here. He had also seen himself live. I accept, he said. Give me a knife. Paul kills Jameis in the Tahadi challenge. The Fremen formed a circle in the cave, their robes rustling, their faces unreadable. Jameis stood at the center, a Kreis knife in his hand, the milky white blade of a sandworm tooth, curved and serrated, its edge sharp enough to shave water from the air. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and heavy-muscled, with a face that had been scarred by wind and sand and violence. Paul stepped into the circle. He had no shield, he had no Kreis knife. He had only the bodkin that Chani had pressed into his hand, a short blade, Fremen-made, balanced differently from the Atreides weapons he had trained with. There can be no yielding in Tahadi, Stilgar said. The fight is to the death. The water of the loser belongs to the winner. This is the law. Fear coursed through Paul. He felt suddenly alone and naked, standing in dull yellow light within this ring of people. Prescience had fed his knowledge with countless experiences, hinted at the strongest currents of the future. But this was the real now. This was death hanging on an infinite number of minuscule mischances. Anyone coughing in the troop of watchers, a distraction. A variation in a glow glob's brilliance, a deceptive shadow. I'm afraid, Paul told himself, and he circled warily, repeating silently the Bene Gesserit litany against fear. Fear is the mind killer. Jameis attacked without warning. It was a simple thrust, direct and powerful, meant to end the fight in a single motion. Paul sidestepped, and the Kreis knife passed through the space where his chest had been. The Fremen murmured. Paul's dodge had used shield fighter timing slow at the beginning of the attack, then deceptively fast at the end, a rhythm designed to fool an opponent who was expecting the constant speed of an unshielded fighter. It was a trick that almost got him killed. Jameis adjusted, anticipated the next feint, and his blade came within a millimeter of Paul's throat. Then Paul remembered Chana's warning. Jameis turns right after a parry. He aims for the eyes. Jameis parried, turned right, aimed for the eyes. Paul was already moving. He ducked under the blade, stepped inside Jameis' guard, and drove his bodkin upward through the soft flesh beneath the Freeman's jaw. The blade bit deep, found the brainstem, and Jameis was dead before his body hit the sand. The circle went absolutely silent. Paul stood over the body, his chest heaving, his hands wet with blood. He had killed before the Harkonnen guard, in the ornithopter, the soldiers who had tried to take his father, but this was different. This was a man who had been trying to kill him for no other reason than that the law demanded it. This was murder dressed up as ritual, and the taste of it was ash in his mouth. Jessica stepped into the circle. Her face was cold, controlled the face of a Bene Gesserit who had seen death and would not be moved by it. How does it feel, she said, her voice cutting, to be a killer? Paul looked at his mother. He saw what she was doing, the deliberate scorn, the provocation meant to prevent him from taking pleasure in the kill. He understood it. He even respected it. But he was not a child who needed to be protected from his own emotions. Not anymore. It feels necessary, he said, and turned away. Paul receives Fremen names. Stilgar came to him as the troop gathered around Jamis' body. You fought well. Jamis was a good fighter. You are a better one. I did not want to kill him. That is why you are a better one. Stilgar's voice was thoughtful. The troop has accepted you. Your mother's trick with the knife. Your skill in the circle, these things have weight among us. You will be given a name. I have a name. You have two names now. Stilgar raised his voice, addressing the cave. This is Paul Muad'Dib. His secret name, for the troop, is Usul, the base of the pillar. His public name is Muad'Dib, the desert mouse. A young warrior in the circle leaned forward. Why a mouse? Stilgar smiled. Because the Muad'Dib is wise. It creates its own water. It travels by night. It is fruitful and multiplies. And when it is cornered, it fights with a ferocity that creatures 10 times its size have learned to fear. Paul closed his eyes. He saw the future rushing toward him in a tide of green and black banners, of fanatic faces chanting his name, of worlds burning and armies marching, and a terrible purpose that would not be denied. It will not be, he whispered. I cannot let it be. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. The jihad was coming. He had seen it in every possible future except the ones where he died before it could begin. And now he had a Fremen name, a Fremen troop, a Fremen legend wrapped around him like the kerchief of the baka that Stilgar had tied at his throat. There was no escape. There was only the desert and the water and the path ahead. Paul accepts Jamis' water. That evening, the troop gathered for Jamis' funeral. His body had been rendered down, the water extracted and measured and stored in ring counter vessels that Chani carried in a pouch at her waist. The Fremen did not bury their dead. They recovered their dead. Every drop of moisture was sacred, every liter a legacy. Chani approached Paul with the water counters. The water of Jamis belongs to you now. You killed him. His water is your water. Paul looked at the counters. 33 liters and some fraction. The distilled essence of a human life, reduced to numbers on a string of rings. He wanted to refuse. The thought of drinking the water of a man he had killed, of absorbing his substance into his own body, was grotesque to everything his Caladan upbringing had taught him. He met his mother's eyes. Jessica looked at him, and in her gaze was the iron command that had shaped his entire childhood. On Arrakis, water is money, she said. Water is power. Accept it as you would accept money on Caladan. It is the same thing. Paul thought of the words, from water does all life begin. He took the counters. The troop sighed in relief, a collective release of tension that told him exactly how close he had come to breaking the fragile acceptance he had earned. Paul's water right and the hidden pool. Then Paul did something that he had not planned, had not predicted, had not seen in any of his prescient visions. He wept. The tears came without warning, hot and silent, tracking clean lines through the dust on his cheeks. He wept for Jamis, a man who had tried to kill him and whom he had killed in return. He wept for his father, dead in a poison cloud on a planet that had never been their home. He wept for the boy he had been on Caladan, the boy who had never fired a weapon in anger, who had never seen a man die at his feet, who had never known what it was to be a killer. The Fremen stared. A man giving water to the dead, actual tears, actual moisture, freely offered without hope of recovery, was a gift beyond their comprehension. It was a sacrifice of self, a pouring out of life itself. It was the most sacred thing a human could do. He gives moisture to the dead, someone whispered. Usul, another voice said, the troop name now spoken with a reverence that had not been there before. Chani stepped forward. She took Paul's hand, and her touch was warm and dry and steady. Come, there is something you must see. She led him through a hidden doorway in the cliff face, down a winding passage that opened into a vast underground chamber. The chamber was lit by glow globes, and in the pale light, Paul saw water, an underground lake still and dark and impossibly deep, its surface smooth as glass, its volume vast beyond measurement. Jessica followed, and he heard her breath catch. Stilgar was beside them. We have more than 38 million decaliters here, walled off from the little makers, hidden and preserved. There are thousands of such caches across the planet. A treasure trove, Jessica said. This is our dream, Stilgar said. This is what Liet Kynes gave his life for, a world where our children's children can walk in the open without stillsuits. A world where water falls from the sky. Paul stared at the lake. He thought about his mother, about the Missionaria Protectiva, about the legends that had been planted on this planet centuries before he was born. He thought about the terrible purpose that hummed in his blood, the jihad that waited in his future like a sandworm beneath the dunes. He thought about Chani's hand in his, and the way her voice had softened when she said his secret name. Paul names his mother enemy. Fremen reveal their dream. He looked at his mother, the Reverend Mother Jessica now, or Sayadina, to the Fremen standing beside the pool with the glow globes casting her shadow long against the water. She had trained him. She had protected him. She had given him every tool he was now using to survive. And she was, without knowing it, the engine of his destruction. "My mother is my enemy," he said quietly. Chani looked at him sharply. "What? She does not know it, but she is. The Bene Gesserit planted their legends here. They created the prophecy of the Lisan al-Gaib. And my mother, by surviving, by being what she is, by training me as she has, she is walking blindly toward a war that will kill billions. She is shaping me into the weapon that will unleash it." "Then stop it," Chani said. "I cannot. Every path I see leads to the same place. The only way to prevent the jihad is to die before it starts. And if I die, the Fremen lose their best chance to defeat the Harkonnens. If I die, the Atreides line ends. If I die, my father's death was for nothing." Chani was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Then do not die. Live. And when the jihad comes, fight to make it something your father would not be ashamed of." Paul turned to look at her. In the glow of the spice lamps, her face was sharp and beautiful and utterly alien, a face from his dreams, a face from his future, a face that he now understood he would die for. "I will try," he said. Across the cave, Jessica watched them, her son and the Fremen girl, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground air. She had seen the way Paul looked at Chani. She had heard the softness in his voice when he spoke her name. This was not a tactical alliance. This was something deeper, something that would bind him to the Fremen in ways that went beyond politics and prophecy. And she was afraid, not of the Fremen, not of the desert, not even of the Harkonnens. She was afraid of her son. Baron presents Feyd-Rautha, private confrontation with Count Fenring. On Gidi Prime, far from the hidden water and the secret dreams of the Fremen, Baron Vladimir Harkonnen stood in the great hall of his palace and presented his nephew to Count and Lady Fenring. Feyd-Rautha was beautiful in the way that a well-crafted knife is beautiful, lean and sharp and dangerous, with full lips and dark eyes that held an intelligence the Baron had carefully cultivated. He wore a tight-fitting black tunic and snug trousers. Soft-soled slippers covered his small feet. He held his bow a fraction longer than courtesy demanded, his gaze moving from Lady Fenring's face to the jewel at her collar and back to her eyes, calculating, the Baron thought with satisfaction, exactly as he had been taught. In that half-second, the boy was deciding whether this woman was prey, obstacle, or tool. His eyes lingered on her throat. Wrong choice. Lady Fenring was neither prey nor audience. She was a Bene Gesserit adept, trained in the same school that had produced the Lady Jessica, and she read the calculation in Feyd-Rautha's gaze with the same ease that a guild navigator read a star chart. "I dedicate my next arena victory to you, my lady," Feyd-Rautha said. Lady Fenring's eyes were cold. "I have no interest in bloodsport, young Harkonnen." The rebuff landed clean. Feyd-Rautha's jaw tightened, and the Baron saw the flash of anger that his nephew tried so hard to conceal. The boy had misread her, treated her as an ornament when she was, in fact, a weapon. Good, let him learn. Failure taught sharper lessons than any trainer's whip. After the formal audience, the Baron withdrew to his private chambers with Count Fenring. The Count was a small man, unremarkable in appearance, but his eyes moved with a watchfulness that the Baron had learned to respect. Fenring was one of the Emperor's closest advisors. He was also, the Baron suspected, one of the Emperor's deadliest weapons. "The Emperor is not pleased," Fenring said, without preamble. He spoke in a soft, slurred voice and affectation, the Baron knew, designed to make opponents underestimate him. "Your Sardaukar cover story is thin. There are rumors on Caetaine that the Atreides were murdered, not defeated in a legitimate Canley dispute." "The Atreides Duke died by his own hand," the Baron said. "He bit a poisoned tooth and tried to take me with him. That is not murder. That is the desperation of a defeated house." And the boy? The woman? The Baron's face hardened. Missing. Presumed dead in the desert. No one survives the deep Urg without Fremen help, and the Fremen kill outsiders on sight. Do they? Fenring's eyes were unreadable. Our overflights show signs of plant life in the southern desert, in places where there should be no plant life. It suggests Fremen activity on a scale we had not anticipated. The Baron felt a cold finger trace his spine. He had been dismissing the Fremen as desert rabble for years. If Fenring was right, if the Fremen were more numerous, more organized than anyone had guessed, then the situation on Arrakis was not a victory. It was a problem that was only beginning to unfold. What does the Emperor want? The Baron asked. He wants the Fremen eliminated. He wants spice production stabilized. He wants no more surprises. Elfrint asked. Fenring paused. And he wants to know who will succeed you. The Baron's eyes narrowed. Feyd-Rautha is my heir. The Emperor has not approved that succession. He will send observers to the arena tomorrow. He wants to see the boy fight. He wants to see if he is worthy. Fenring left the chamber without waiting for a response. The Baron sat alone in his suspensor chair, his massive body trembling with a rage he could not afford to show. The Emperor was questioning his choice of heir. The Fremen were defying him. The Atreides were dead but not forgotten, their martyrdom already breeding resentment among the great houses. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded like Peter de Vries dead now, dissolved in a poison cloud along with his duke, whispered that the Atreides boy was not dead, that the desert had not claimed him, that a reckoning was coming that no amount of scheming could prevent. The Baron silenced the voice. He was a Harkonnen. He did not fear ghosts, he did not fear the desert, and he most certainly did not fear a dead duke's son. But as the lights of Giedi Prime's industrial wastelands flickered outside his window, he could not quite shake the feeling that somewhere on Arrakis, a boy with his father's eyes was looking up at the stars and planning his return. The next episode continues with the arena spectacle on Giedi Prime and Paul's deepening integration into the Fremen way of life. Episode 5, Baron's prison plan and Fenring's warning on succession to Paul, forces the southern route. Count Fenring stood near the door of the Baron's private chamber on Giedi Prime and watched the Baron float in his suspensor harness. The Baron had dismissed his guards. They were alone. "You think you can harness the Fremen?" Fenring asked. His voice carried its characteristic slur, but the Baron was not fooled. He had seen Fenring's eyes during the arena spectacle. Those eyes missed nothing. There never were enough of them for that, the Baron said, but the killing has made the rest of my population uneasy. I'm considering another solution to the Arrakeen problem. He paused. The Emperor deserves credit for the inspiration. Fenring's expression did not change. What possible connection is there between Arrakis and Salusa Secundus? No connection yet. You must admit it. It'd be a way to develop a substantial workforce on Arrakis. Use the place as a prison planet. The desert is its own guard. Where would prisoners run to? The spice operations need labor. Prisoners are cheap. Prisoners are disposable. You've thought about this. I think about many things, Count. For instance, I think about Thufir Hawat. You suggested I withdraw the antidote and let him die. I refused. Hawat knows Atreides' operational methods, their contacts among the smugglers, their hidden accounts. He is a weapon. I control him through the poison. He takes his antidote from my hand. That breeds a certain dependency. It breeds desperation, Fenring said. Desperate men do desperate things. Hawat is a mentat. He cannot act against his own computations. Fenring took a step closer. The Baron felt his skin tighten. He had never seen Fenring move with hostile intent, but everyone had heard stories. The Emperor is not entirely satisfied with the situation on Arrakis. The Sardaukar cover story has worn thin. There are whispers on Kaitain about your nephew. The Baron's eyes narrowed. Feyd-Rautha is my designated heir. The Emperor has not confirmed that designation. He wishes to judge for himself whether Feyd-Rautha is suitable. If he acquits himself well tomorrow, the succession will be confirmed. If not, the Emperor has other candidates. The Baron let the silence stretch. If the Emperor wronged him openly, if he refused to confirm Feyd-Rautha, the other great houses would notice. They would see the Emperor was willing to break the ancient forms. They would become afraid, and afraid houses were houses that could be rallied. I will present my nephew to the arena. He will fight, he will win, and then we will discuss the succession. Fenring nodded slowly. The Emperor is watching, Baron. He is always watching. When Fenring was gone, the Baron sat alone and let the rage come. Fenring nodded. It washed through him like fire, and he used it to sharpen his thoughts. The Atreides were dead. The Fremen were a problem that could be solved with brutality, and the Emperor was a problem that could be solved with time and planning. Feyd-Rautha remained, the beautiful boy who had tried to assassinate him, the heir who still needed tempering, the weapon whose bloodline might yet produce the Kwisatz Haderach the Bene Gesserit wanted. Losing Feyd-Rautha would be more than a political setback. It would end a plan stretching back generations. The arena Feyd-Rautha rose early on the morning of the spectacle. He understood that Tade's performance would determine his entire life. He checked his body shield, then inspected his equipment. Gyves with glistening barbs, weighted hooks, the short blade and the long blade balanced for his grip. The long blade carried a special preparation, a clear poison gel worked into microscopic grooves at the tip. None of his handlers knew. Hawat did not know. The Baron did not know. The Baron, in fact, did not know many things. He did not know that Feyd-Rautha had cultivated his own spy network over the last month, separate from the Baron's, separate from Hawat's. He did not know that Feyd-Rautha had identified the slave sent to kill him, a boy with a blemish on his thigh that Nefud had missed, but Feyd-Rautha's people had discovered. He did not know that Feyd-Rautha had allowed the assassination attempt to proceed within a handsbreadth of success, just to see who would move and who would react. The boy had failed, of course. But the attempt had revealed the pattern of the Baron's surveillance, the weak points in Hawat's security, the names of men who could be bribed. The information was worth a dozen lives. Now Feyd-Rautha stood at the arena entrance, the crowd roaring. Today the Emperor's observers were in the stands. Today the succession was at stake. The slow march began. Feyd-Rautha led his troop to the foot of the Baron's box, caught the ceremonial key, and raised it as the music stopped. I dedicate this truth to my uncle and patron, the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. He saw the Baron's face relax. Good. The old man had worried Feyd-Rautha would dedicate the kill to Lady Fenring, embarrassing the family. Hawat had advised against it. Hamentat's advice was usually sound. The gladiator emerged tall, broad-shouldered, wearing green leotards with a hawk symbol drawn in blood, crude but unmistakable. An Atreides soldier, captured on Arrakis, brought here to die for Harkonnen entertainment. Feyd-Rautha felt a flicker that might have been respect. The man had nothing, no weapons, no armor, no hope, but he had painted his duke symbol on his chest with his own blood. The slave master released the chains. The gladiator walked toward Feyd-Rautha with the measured stride of a soldier who had accepted death and intended to make it expensive. I do not fear you, Harkonnes swine, the man said. Your tortures cannot hurt a dead man. I can be dead on my own blade before a handler lays finger to my flesh, and ill have your blood before I go. Feyd-Rautha smiled. He drew his short blade in his left hand, his long blade in his right, and moved into the arena's center. The gladiator was unarmed except for barbed hooks lashed to his forearms. He held his arms wide, inviting attack. Feyd-Rautha saw intelligence in his eyes. This man was no brawler. Feyd-Rautha planted his feet and waited. The gladiator lunged with the right arm barb, a slashing blow aimed at the throat. Feyd-Rautha slipped it easily, countering with a flick of his long blade that opened a line of red across the man's forearm. The crowd roared. The gladiator did not flinch. He pressed forward, both barbs working, driving Feyd-Rautha back. The man was faster than any drugged slave should be. The thought came to Feyd-Rautha with cold clarity. Hawat planned this. The Mentat had arranged an undrugged opponent, setting up the slave master as the patsy. By forcing Feyd-Rautha to earn his victory before the Emperor's observers, Hawat was shaping the narrative. The crowd would see an heir who could truly fight. But Hawat's plans always had a second layer. The gladiator might have a hidden weapon. The handlers might have been bribed. The gladiator lunged again. Feyd-Rautha moved inside his guard, his short blade deflecting the left arm barb while his long blade darted forward and sank into the gladiator's right arm above the elbow. The man's hand spasmed open. The barb fell. The crowd screamed its approval. Feyd-Rautha stepped back, letting the show build. The man transferred the remaining barb to his good hand. Your duke is dead, Feyd-Rautha said, his voice pitched to carry. Your house is dust. "I have my honor," the gladiator said, and he attacked. Feyd-Rautha parried the bar with his short blade, using his long blade to open new wounds in the man's thighs, his shoulders, his belly. Blood stained the green leotards black. Still the gladiator came forward. He was trying to close distance, trying to force a grapple where the barb could do its work, and Feyd-Rautha understood the third layer of Hawat's plan. The gladiator was not merely undrugged, he was trained, specifically briefed on Feyd-Rautha's fighting style, on his tells and patterns. The gladiator was trying to kill him. And Hawat had made it possible. Cold rage sharpened Feyd-Rautha's perceptions. He let the gladiator close. He let the man believe he was succeeding, and when the gladiator lunged for the final grapple, Feyd-Rautha drove his long blade up under the man's jaw, through the soft flesh beneath the chin, into the brain. The gladiator's eyes went wide. His hand, still gripping the barb, came to rest against Feyd-Rautha's chest. For a long moment they stood frozen. Then the gladiator's knees buckled, and Feyd-Rautha stepped aside to let the body crash into the sand. The crowd erupted. Feyd-Rautha stood in the center of it, blades red, chest heaving. Then he raised his hand for silence. This man earned his death. He fought well. He will be buried intact, with his knife, as a soldier should be buried. Silence held for a heartbeat. Then the cheering began again, louder and wilder, and Feyd-Rautha heard something new in it. It was not just admiration, it was love. The people of Giedi Prime loved him for his cruelty in the arena and his mercy after it. In the stands, Count Fenring leaned toward his wife. That gesture with the burial Hawat taught him that. It stinks of mentat calculation, but the killing stroke was his own. "The boy can fight. The boy can do more than fight," Lady Fenring murmured, studying Feyd-Rautha's face. When the gladiator turned out to be undrugged, when he tried to turn the short blade, Feyd-Rautha was not surprised. He was ready. He had planned for it. Yes, someone told him, or he figured it out himself. Either way, he is more dangerous than his uncle realizes. The